The leather seat in first class felt cold against Victoria Sterling's back as she settled into 2A. On the red-eye flight to Miami, her fingers drummed against the armrest with practiced precision, a habit she'd developed during countless board meetings when deals hung in the balance. The digital clock on her phone showed 11:47 p.m., and she calculated exactly 6 hours and 13 minutes until her presentation to the Henderson Group would determine whether Sterling Industries secured the biggest contract in their 30-year history. Victoria had built her empire from the ground up after inheriting a small textile company from her late father. At 34, she commanded respect in boardrooms across 3 continents. But tonight, the weight of responsibility felt heavier than usual. The Henderson deal would either cement her legacy or force her to lay off 200 employees. There was no middle ground in her world. There never had been. The flight attendant approached with her practiced smile, offering champagne that Victoria declined with a polite shake of her head. She never drank alcohol before important meetings, and she certainly didn't waste time on small talk with strangers during flights. Her routine was sacred: review presentation materials, check market reports, and maintain the laser focus that had made her one of the youngest female CEOs in the industry. The boarding process continued around her as business travelers and vacationers filled the cabin. Victoria barely glanced up from her tablet, where quarterly projections glowed in neat columns and graphs. Numbers made sense to her in a way that people often didn't. Numbers didn't have hidden agendas or emotional complications that could derail carefully laid plans. Then he appeared in the aisle. Gabriel Torres moved with the unhurried grace of someone accustomed to long shifts in emergency situations. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and his olive skin showed the exhaustion of someone who had been working for hours without rest. He wore simple jeans and a navy pullover that had seen better days, but there was something about his presence that made Victoria look up from her screen. He checked his boarding pass twice, then glanced at the seat number above her row. The confusion in his brown eyes was evident as he realized his ticket showed to be the seat directly next to the formidable businesswoman who had been working since takeoff was announced. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice carrying a slight accent that Victoria couldn't immediately place. "I think this might be my seat." Victoria nodded without making eye contact, shifting slightly to give him room to store his worn leather messenger bag in the overhead compartment. She noticed his hands as he lifted the bag, clean and careful, with the steady movements of someone who worked with precision. Medical professional, she guessed automatically, her mind cataloging details the same way. She analyzed potential business partners Gabriel settled into, his seat with a quiet sigh that spoke of relief and exhaustion in equal measure. He buckled his seatbelt and leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment before reaching for the safety card in the seat pocket. Victoria caught a glimpse of his profile and found herself studying the line of his jaw, the way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks. The flight attendant began the safety demonstration, and Gabriel followed along with the kind of attention most frequent flyers had abandoned years ago. Victoria realized he probably didn't fly often, which made his presence in first class even more intriguing. An upgrade, perhaps, or a special occasion that required the extra comfort. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Gabriel pulled out a medical journal and began reading an article about pediatric cardiac procedures. Victoria couldn't help but notice the way he made small notes in the margins with a pen that looked like it had been through countless shifts. His concentration was absolute, the same kind of focus she recognized in herself when reviewing contracts. That could change everything. The takeoff was smooth, and once they reached cruising altitude, the cabin lights dimmed to encourage rest during the overnight flight. Victoria returned to her presentation materials. She found herself stealing glances at her seatmate as he continued reading. There was something peaceful about his presence, a stillness that contrasted sharply with the constant motion of her own thoughts. Gabriel's cologne was subtle, not the aggressive designer fragrances she was accustomed to from business associates. This was warmer, more personal, with notes of cedar and something that reminded her of rain on summer evenings. It was the scent of someone who lived life rather than simply managing it. The hours passed quietly. Victoria worked through financial projections while Gabriel read medical literature, their activities creating an odd harmony in the intimate space of their row. Neither spoke, but there was a comfortable awareness between them, like two professionals recognizing the dedication in each other's focus. It was some time after 2 a.m. when exhaustion finally claimed Gabriel. Victoria noticed when his breathing became deeper and more regular when the medical journal slipped slightly in his hands. She looked over to see his eyes closed, his face relaxed in sleep, and something about his vulnerability made her chest tighten unexpectedly. The plane hit a patch of turbulence. Nothing severe, but enough to cause Gabriel to shift in his sleep. His head tilted toward her, and before Victoria could process what was happening, his temple came to rest against her shoulder. The contact was so gentle, so natural, that Victoria found herself frozen. Gabriel's hair was soft against her neck, and his breathing created a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat. The scent of his cologne intensified, wrapping around her like a warm embrace she hadn't realized she needed. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, Victoria Sterling stopped working. Her hands stilled on the keyboard, her eyes moved away from the screen, and she simply existed in the moment. Gabriel's weight against her shoulder was surprisingly comforting, and she found herself studying his peaceful expression with an attention she usually reserved for market analysis. He looked younger in sleep, though she guessed he was close to her own age. There were faint lines around his eyes that spoke of long nights and difficult decisions, but also laugh lines that suggested joy she rarely experienced in her own life. His lips were slightly parted, and she could see the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath the soft fabric of his sweater. Victoria had spent her adult life maintaining careful boundaries, keeping her personal and professional worlds completely separate. She dated occasionally, always men from her social circle who understood that her career came first. But sitting in the darkened cabin with this stranger sleeping on her shoulder, she felt something shift inside her chest like tectonic plates. Rearranging after years of stability, the flight attendant passed by and smiled knowingly at the scene. But Victoria didn't care about appearances for once. She found herself adjusting her position slightly to make Gabriel more comfortable, a gesture so foreign to her nature that it surprised her. When had she ever put someone else's comfort before her own immediate needs? Gabriel murmured something in his sleep, words too soft to understand, but the sound sent warmth spreading through Victoria's ribcage. She wondered what he dreamed about. This man who read medical journals and carried himself with such gentle confidence. Did he dream about patients he had saved? About procedures that could heal children? About a life dedicated to caring for others in ways Victoria had never experienced? The plane began its descent toward Miami as dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Victoria knew she should wake him, should return to her presentation materials, and prepare for the meeting that would define her company's future. But she found herself reluctant to disturb the peace that had settled over them. Both. It was Gabriel who woke naturally, his internal clock trained by years of hospital shifts. His eyes opened slowly, and Victoria watched as awareness returned to his features. The moment he realized where he was, where his head had been resting, his eyes widened with mortification. "God," he whispered, straightening up so quickly. He nearly hit his head on the reading light above. "I'm so sorry, I had no idea. I was exhausted from a double shift, and I never sleep on planes, but I must have." His cheeks flushed with embarrassment as he ran a hand through his hair, trying to restore some semblance of dignity. Victoria found his flustered state endearing in a way that completely disrupted her usual composure. "It's perfectly fine," she heard herself saying, her voice softer than she intended. "You were clearly exhausted." Gabriel looked at her with surprise, as if he had expected anger or disgust rather than understanding. "I work at Children's Hospital," he explained, still clearly embarrassed. "Pediatric intensive care. We had 3 emergency admissions yesterday, and I stayed late to make sure all the kids were stable before catching this flight." The information hit Victoria like a revelation. This man who had slept so trustingly against her shoulder spent his days saving children's lives. While she moved numbers around spreadsheets and negotiated deals that affected corporate bottom lines, Gabriel Torres held the hands of frightened children and gave parents hope in their darkest moments. "That must be incredibly demanding work," Victoria said, and she meant it. She had never considered the emotional toll of medical professionals who dealt with pediatric emergencies. Gabriel's expression softened at her genuine interest. "It is," he admitted. "But it's also the most rewarding thing I've ever done. When you see a child recover from something that could have taken their future away, nothing else compares to that feeling." The plane touched down smoothly, and the usual bustle of disembarking began around them. Victoria felt an unexpected reluctance to end this conversation, to return to her world of corporate strategies and financial projections. Gabriel gathered his belongings with the same careful movements she had noticed earlier, and she found herself memorizing the way he folded his medical journal and tucked his pen into his pocket as they stood to leave. Gabriel turned to her one final time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not making me feel worse about falling asleep on you. I know it must have been uncomfortable." Victoria wanted to tell him that it hadn't been uncomfortable at all, that it had been the most peaceful few hours she had experienced in years. Instead, she nodded politely and watched as he made his way down the aisle. Disappearing into the crowd of passengers eager to begin their day in Miami, she remained in her seat until the plane had nearly emptied, her mind replaying every moment of their encounter. The Henderson presentation suddenly felt less important than understanding the strange flutter in her chest. When Gabriel had smiled his goodbye, Victoria Sterling had built an empire by controlling every variable. But Gabriel Torres had introduced an element she couldn't quantify or predict. As she finally gathered her briefcase and laptop, Victoria caught a faint trace of his cologne. Lingering on her jacket, the scent would stay with her through the most important meeting of her career. A reminder that some of life's most significant moments happened not in boardrooms or corner offices, but in the quiet space between strangers, who might not be strangers much longer. The morning sun streamed through the terminal windows as Victoria walked toward her waiting car, but her thoughts remained at 30,000 feet, where a pediatric nurse had unknowingly changed everything. Simply by falling asleep on her shoulder, the crystal ballroom of the Fontainebleau Hotel sparkled under thousands of lights as Miami's elite gathered for the annual Children's Hospital Foundation Gala. Victoria Sterling adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist and surveyed the crowd with the practiced eye of someone who had attended countless charity events. These gatherings were part business, part social obligation, and entirely necessary for maintaining the Sterling Industries' image in the community. 3 weeks had passed since her flight encounter with Gabriel Torres. Though Victoria found herself thinking about him far more often than logic dictated, she had secured the Henderson contract, a victory that should have dominated her thoughts completely. Instead, she caught herself wondering about the pediatric nurse who had slept so peacefully against her shoulder, whose dedication to saving children had impressed her more than any business proposal ever could. Tonight's event supported the very hospital where Gabriel worked. Though Victoria had no expectation of seeing him, she had purchased a platinum table sponsorship because supporting children's healthcare aligned with her company's community investment strategy. The fact that it might provide insight into Gabriel's world was merely a coincidence. She tried not to examine too closely. Dr. Marina Costello, the hospital's distinguished director, approached Victoria's table with the confidence of someone accustomed to soliciting major donations from influential donors. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, with silver hair swept into a sophisticated chignon and eyes that held the wisdom of decades spent in medical practice. "Ms. Sterling," Dr. Costello said warmly, extending her hand. "Thank you so much for your generous support tonight. Your company's commitment to our children's programs means more than you know." Victoria stood to greet her properly, noting the genuine appreciation in the doctor's voice. Unlike many charity events where gratitude felt rehearsed, there was something authentic about Dr. Costello's manner that reminded Victoria of someone else she had recently met. "The work you do here is invaluable," Victoria replied, meaning every word. Her research into the hospital had revealed impressive statistics about patient outcomes and innovative treatments that genuinely impressed her business-minded approach. To evaluating organizations, Dr. Costello's eyes lit up with pride. "We have an incredible team of professionals who make miracles happen every day. In fact, I'd love for you to meet one of our most dedicated nurses later tonight. Gabriel Torres has developed some remarkable protocols for pediatric cardiac care. that we're hoping to expand with additional funding? Victoria's heart skipped at the mention of Gabriel's name, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. I would be interested in learning more about innovative medical protocols, she said, which was true enough without revealing her personal interest. The evening progressed with the typical rhythm of charity galas. Dinner was served while speakers shared heartwarming stories of medical successes and families helped by the hospital's programs. Victoria found herself more engaged than usual, particularly when children who had been patients spoke about their experiences. Her courage and resilience struck her in ways she hadn't expected. When Dr. Costello took the stage for the main presentation, Victoria's attention sharpened. The hospital director spoke passionately about expanding their pediatric intensive care unit, about new technologies that could save more lives, and about the dedicated professionals who worked tirelessly to give children second chances at healthy futures. Tonight, I want to share a specific example of the innovation happening in our hospital, Dr. Costello continued. One of our nurses has developed a revolutionary approach to monitoring cardiac patients that has reduced complications by 37%. Please welcome Gabriel Torres to tell you about this program himself. Victoria's breath caught as Gabriel walked onto the stage, looking strikingly different from the exhausted traveler she had met on the airplane. He wore a well-tailored dark suit that emphasized his lean build, and his hair was styled in a way that highlighted his strong features. But what struck her most was his confidence as he approached the microphone. The same quiet strength she had sensed during their brief encounter. Gabriel began speaking about his work with children who had complex cardiac conditions. And Victoria found herself completely captivated by his passion. He described cases where his monitoring protocols had detected problems hours before traditional methods would have identified them, giving doctors crucial time to intervene and save young lives. When I see a 7-year-old girl recover from surgery that could have ended her dreams of becoming a dancer, Gabriel said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom, I remember why we do this work. It's not about the long hours or the emotional challenges. It's about giving children the chance to grow up, to chase their dreams, to live the lives they deserve. The audience was completely silent, hanging on his every word. Victoria noticed that several people were wiping away tears, moved by Gabriel's genuine emotion and the stories he shared. She found herself studying his face as he spoke, remembering how peaceful he had looked sleeping beside her, and marveling at this more dynamic version of the same man. Gabriel concluded his presentation by outlining the funding needed to expand his monitoring program to other hospitals, potentially saving hundreds of additional children each year. The audience erupted in applause, and Victoria joined in enthusiastically, proud of him in a way that surprised her with its intensity. As Gabriel left the stage, their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. Victoria saw the exact moment when recognition dawned on his features, the same surprise and interest she felt coursing through her own system. He paused mid-step, causing the person behind him to nearly collide with his back, but Gabriel didn't seem to notice. He was looking directly at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Dr. Costello returned to the microphone to continue with auction items and additional presentations. But Victoria found it impossible to concentrate on anything except Gabriel's presence somewhere in the room. She kept glancing around, trying to locate him without appearing obvious to her tablemates, who were engaged in discussions about the hospital's programs. 20 minutes later, she felt a presence beside her chair and turned to find Gabriel, standing there with 2 glasses of champagne and a smile that made her pulse quicken unexpectedly. I thought you might like some champagne, he said quietly, offering her one of the glasses. Though I remember from our flight that you don't drink alcohol before important meetings. I'm hoping tonight doesn't qualify as work, Victoria accepted the glass, surprised that he had remembered such a small detail from their brief interaction. Tonight is definitely not work, she said, and realized it was the first time in years she had attended a social event without calculating its business value. Gabriel gestured toward an empty chair at her table. May I sit for a moment? I've a break before the auction begins. Victoria nodded, acutely aware of her tablemate's curious glances as this handsome hospital employee joined their group. She made brief introductions, noting how Gabriel interacted with everyone with the same genuine interest he had shown when discussing his patients on stage. Your presentation was remarkable, Victoria said, when the conversation allowed for a more private exchange. The passion you have for your work is evident in every word. Gabriel's cheeks colored slightly at the compliment. Thank you. I was terrified, actually. Much more comfortable with patients than with crowds of potential donors. But Dr. Costello convinced me that sharing our story might help more children, so I couldn't refuse. This glimpse of vulnerability made Victoria like him even more. Here was a man who commanded respect in life-or-death medical situations, but felt nervous about public speaking, who prioritized helping children over his own comfort, remembered details about virtual strangers he met on airplanes. How's your work going since Miami? Gabriel asked, and Victoria was touched that he remembered her business travel. Did your presentation go well? Victoria found herself sharing more than she usually would with anyone, let alone someone she barely knew. She told him about the Henderson contract, about the relief of securing her employees' jobs, about the satisfaction of building something that would last. Gabriel listened with the same focused attention she had noticed during their flight, asking thoughtful questions. That showed he was genuinely interested in her answers. It must be incredible pressure, Gabriel said. Having so many people, depending on your decisions, knowing that one mistake could affect hundreds of families. I deal with life and death situations regularly, but the scope of responsibility you carry is staggering. No one had ever framed her work quite that way before. Most people focused on the financial rewards or the power that came with her position. But Gabriel understood the weight of responsibility she carried for her employees and their families. It was a perspective that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before. Dr. Costello appeared at their table, smiling warmly at the sight of Gabriel and Victoria deep in conversation. I see you two have met, she said with obvious pleasure. Gabriel, I was hoping you might give Ms. Sterling a brief tour of our facilities sometime this week. She's expressed interest in learning more about our innovative protocols. Victoria felt her heart rate increase at the suggestion, though she managed to maintain her professional demeanor. Gabriel looked at her with raised eyebrows, clearly checking whether she was actually interested or simply being polite. I would genuinely like to see your work environment, Victoria said honestly. What you described tonight sounds revolutionary, and I'm always interested in learning about innovations that create measurable improvements. Gabriel's smile was radiant. I would love to show you around. We're particularly proud of our new pediatric cardiac unit, and I think you'd find the technology fascinating from a business perspective. Would Thursday afternoon work for you, Victoria? Mentally rearranged her schedule before Gabriel had finished speaking. Thursday afternoon would be perfect. As Dr. Costello moved on to visit other tables, Gabriel and Victoria found themselves alone again in the crowded ballroom. The auction was beginning on stage, but neither seemed particularly interested in the proceedings around them. I have to admit something, Gabriel said, his voice lower now. I've thought about our flight more often than I probably should have. You were incredibly kind about my falling asleep on you, and that kindness stuck with me. Victoria felt warmth spreading through her chest at his honesty. I've thought about it too, she admitted, surprising herself with her candor. There was something peaceful about that moment that I don't often experience in my usual routine. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the auction activity while both processing the significance of their mutual admission. Victoria realized that Gabriel represented something she hadn't known she was missing. A gentleness and authenticity that contrasted beautifully with the calculated nature of her professional world. The evening wound down around them as auction items were sold and guests began making their departures. Gabriel stood to return to his hospital duties, and Victoria felt an unexpected reluctance to see him leave. Thursday at 2 o'clock, Gabriel confirmed, and Victoria nodded eagerly. I'll meet you at the main reception desk, she said, already anticipating their next encounter with more excitement than she had felt about anything in months. Gabriel paused before leaving, looking at her with an expression that held both anticipation and something deeper. Victoria, he said, using her first name for the first time, I'm really glad you came tonight. Seeing you again feels like more than just coincidence. As he walked away through the elegant ballroom, Victoria remained seated, watching his retreating figure and marveling at how this gentle pediatric nurse had managed to disrupt her carefully ordered world simply by being himself. Thursday couldn't come quickly enough. Thursday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn sunlight that made Miami's skyline shimmer like a mirage. Victoria Sterling stood in the marble lobby of Children's Hospital, feeling uncharacteristically nervous as she waited for Gabriel Torres to appear. She had changed her outfit 3 times that morning, finally settling on a navy blue dress that was professional yet approachable, paired with comfortable heels that would allow her to walk through hospital corridors without difficulty. The lobby buzzed with activity as families came and went, some carrying balloons and flowers that suggested good news, others moving with the heavy steps of people facing difficult situations. Victoria observed the controlled chaos of a major medical facility and marveled at how different this environment was from the pristine corporate towers where she usually conducted business. "Victoria?" Gabriel's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. She turned to find him approaching in his hospital scrubs, stethoscope draped around his neck, and that same genuine smile that had captivated her during their previous encounters. Even in his work uniform, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that she found increasingly attractive. "Thank you for making time to show me around," Victoria said, extending her hand for a professional greeting. But when Gabriel's fingers closed around hers, the contact lingered just a moment longer than necessary, and she felt that same electric connection that had surprised her on their flight. "I've been looking forward to this all week," Gabriel admitted. His honesty is refreshing. "As always, come on, let me show you where the magic happens." He led her through security checkpoints and down corridors lined with colorful murals that had obviously been painted to make the hospital environment less intimidating for young patients. Victoria noticed how every staff member they passed greeted Gabriel warmly, from housekeeping personnel to senior physicians. It was clear that he was not only respected but genuinely liked by his colleagues. Their first stop was the pediatric intensive care unit, where Gabriel had implemented his revolutionary monitoring protocols. Through large windows, Victoria could see children in various stages of recovery. Some connected to complex machines, while others sat up in bed playing with tablets or coloring books. The juxtaposition of serious medical equipment and cheerful decorations created an atmosphere that was both clinically advanced and emotionally nurturing. "This is where I spend most of my time," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to accommodate the quiet atmosphere of the unit.
Wow.
Each of these children represents someone's entire world. Parents who would give anything to trade places with their child. Siblings who don't understand why their brother or sister has to stay in the hospital. Grandparents who travel across the country to be here during treatment. Victoria watched Gabriel's face as he spoke, seeing how deeply he felt the emotional weight of his work. She had never considered the psychological toll that medical professionals must bear, the way they had to remain strong and optimistic for families while dealing with the constant reality of childhood, illness, and mortality. "How do you manage the emotional aspect of this work?" Victoria asked as they walked past a room where a young boy was receiving physical therapy. "It must be incredibly difficult to maintain hope when outcomes aren't always positive." Gabriel paused near a window overlooking the hospital's healing garden, where several families sat on benches enjoying the afternoon sun. "You learn to focus on what you can control," he said thoughtfully. "I can't guarantee outcomes, but I can guarantee that every child receives the best possible care, that their families feel supported, and that we never stop fighting for recovery. Sometimes that has to be enough." His philosophy struck Victoria as remarkably mature and grounded. In her business world, success was measured in quantifiable metrics and financial returns. Gabriel's world required a different kind of strength, one that could find meaning in effort and compassion, even when results weren't guaranteed. Their tours continued through different departments, each revealing new aspects of Gabriel's expertise and dedication. In the cardiac unit, he introduced Victoria to Dr. Sarah Kim, a pediatric cardiologist who praised Gabriel's monitoring innovations with obvious enthusiasm. "Gabriel's protocols have revolutionized how we detect complications," Dr. Kim explained. To Victoria, his attention to detail and intuitive understanding of patient needs have saved more lives than I can count. "We're hoping to publish our research in major medical journals next year," Victoria felt a surge of pride, watching Gabriel receive recognition from his medical colleagues. She realized that his impact on children's lives was not just emotional, but scientifically significant, contributing to advances that would benefit patients far beyond this single hospital. As they walked through the recovery wing, Gabriel stopped at the room of a 7-year-old girl named Emma who was recovering from complex heart surgery. The child's face lit up when she saw Gabriel, and she immediately launched into an animated description of the book she was reading. "Emma is one of our success stories," Gabriel told Victoria quietly while the little girl showed her favorite pages to her visiting grandmother. "She came to us 6 months ago with a condition that had a very uncertain prognosis. Now she's planning to return to school next month and wants to try out for the soccer team." Victoria watched the interaction between Gabriel and his young patient, noting how naturally he communicated with Emma, neither talking down to her nor overwhelming her with medical terminology. He asked about her favorite subjects in school, listened intently to her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, and promised to visit again before his shift ended. "She adores you," Victoria observed as they left Emma's room. Gabriel's cheeks colored slightly. "Children here teach me as much as I help them. Their resilience and optimism in the face of serious illness is humbling." Emma never complained during months of treatment, never lost her sense of humor, never stopped believing she would get better. How can you not be inspired by that kind of courage? Their hospital tours concluded in Gabriel's small office, a cluttered but organized space filled with medical journals, patient charts, and photographs of children he had helped over the years. Victoria noticed a handmade card on his desk with crayon drawings and the words "Thank you for making me feel brave," Mr. Gabriel written in a child's careful handwriting. "Would you like some coffee?" Gabriel asked, gesturing toward a small machine in the corner. "It's not fancy, but it keeps me functioning during long shifts." Victoria accepted gratefully, settling into the chair across from Gabriel's desk while he prepared the cups. The coffee was indeed simple, but sharing it in this intimate space felt more meaningful than elaborate business lunches she had attended in 5-star restaurants. "Can I ask you something personal?" Victoria said, cradling her mug and studying Gabriel's face in the afternoon light filtering through his office window. "Of course. What made you choose pediatric nursing? It seems like such an emotionally demanding specialty." Gabriel leaned back in his chair, considering his answer carefully. "My younger sister had leukemia when I was in college," he said quietly. "She spent 2 years in and out of hospitals, and I watched how much difference compassionate nursing care made to her recovery, and to our entire family's ability to cope with the situation." Victoria felt her chest tighten at this revelation. "Is she all right now?" Gabriel's smile was radiant. "She's been in remission for 8 years. She's married, has 2 children of her own, and works as a teacher. But I'll never forget what those nurses did for us during the scariest period of our lives. They didn't just treat her medical condition. They treated our fear, our uncertainty, our need for hope." This insight into Gabriel's motivation added another layer to Victoria's growing admiration for him. His career choice wasn't just professional ambition, but a deeply personal mission to provide the kind of care that had helped his own family through crisis. "That's a beautiful reason to choose such challenging work," Victoria said softly. "What about you?" Gabriel asked, turning the question around. "What drew you to building a business empire? That seems equally demanding in its own way." Victoria found herself sharing stories she rarely told anyone. Out her father's small textile company and her determination to honor his legacy by growing it into something significant. She talked about the satisfaction of creating jobs, of building something that would outlast her, of proving that a woman could succeed in industries dominated by men. "My father always said that success isn't just about making money," Victoria said. "It's about making a difference, about leaving the world better than you found it. I try to run sterling industries with that philosophy, though I sometimes wonder if corporate success can really make the kind of difference that your work does." Gabriel set down his coffee mug and looked at her with an intensity that made Victoria's heart race. "Are you kidding? You employ hundreds of people. You provide for their families. You support community organizations like our hospital. The difference you make might be less visible than healing sick children, but it's equally important." No one had ever framed her work quite that way before. Victoria had always measured her success in financial terms, but Gabriel's perspective helped her see the human impact of her business decisions in a new light. Their conversation continued as the afternoon stretched into early evening, covering topics that ranged from their childhood dreams to their current challenges. Victoria discovered that Gabriel spoke 3 languages, played guitar in his spare time, and volunteered at a local literacy program on weekends. Gabriel learned that Victoria had studied art history before switching to business, still painted watercolors as a hobby, and secretly funded college scholarships for underprivileged students. "Should let you get back to your patients," Victoria said reluctantly as the sun began setting outside Gabriel's office window. "Thank you for the most educational afternoon I've had in years." Gabriel stood as she did, but neither moved toward the door. They faced each other in the small space, and Victoria felt the air between them crackling with unspoken possibility. "Victoria," Gabriel said, his voice softer than she had heard it before, "would you like to have dinner with me sometime?" "Not a hospital tour or a charity event, just ... dinner." Victoria's heart pounded as she looked into his warm brown eyes, seeing hope and uncertainty in equal measure. This man who saved children's lives was nervous about asking her to dinner, and she found his vulnerability absolutely irresistible. "I would love that," she said, meaning it more than she had meant anything in years. Gabriel's smile was brilliant. "Tomorrow night, I know a little place in Coconut Grove that makes the best Cuban food in Miami. Nothing fancy, but the atmosphere is perfect for actually getting to know each other." Victoria nodded eagerly. "That sounds wonderful." As they walked back through the hospital corridors toward the main entrance, Victoria reflected on how much her world had expanded in the space of a few hours. Gabriel's dedication to healing children, his compassionate approach to medicine, his ability to find joy and meaning in challenging work had given her new perspectives on what truly mattered in life. At the hospital entrance, Gabriel paused before saying goodbye. "I'm really glad Dr. Costello suggested this tour," he said. "Getting to share my work with someone who appreciates both the technical and emotional aspects means more than you know." Victoria realized that Gabriel had given her something precious that afternoon. A glimpse into a world where success was measured not in profits but in lives saved. Where fulfillment came from service rather than achievement. Where love and compassion were just as important as skill and expertise. "Until tomorrow," she said. And the promise in those words felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. As Victoria walked to her car, she carried with her the lingering scent of hospital corridors and Gabriel's cologne, the memory of his passionate explanations and gentle interactions with patients, and the growing certainty that this pediatric nurse had somehow become the most important person in her carefully ordered world. The story continues with their dinner date. People from different worlds discover that love recognizes no boundaries when hearts are open to possibility.